The wind in Drybell never rushed, it lingered, dragging its feet like an old man reluctant to leave a memory behind. Dust rose slow and low, whispering across the wooden porch boards of shuttered shops and tired saloons. It was the kind of town where everything stayed in plain sight, except the truth. That, it seemed, knew how to hide. Especially when wrapped in silence and a bonnet pulled low. Beneath a buckboard wagon behind the general store, she trembled, knees drawn to her chest, spine pressed to the iron wheel. Clara May Whitlow, once the apple pie of town dances, now wore dirt like a second skin. The hem of her dress frayed, the knuckles on her hands raw from clawing warmth into herself when the nights dipped mean. She'd stopped crying 2 days ago. Crying made sound, and sound brought attention. The wagon had been her church and prison both. Its slats leaked moonlight onto her cheeks, showing glimpses of bruises not quite gone yellow. One by one, the town had turned its back on her, led by whispers soft as lace and just as cutting. She brought it on herself, they said. She let him in. Clara had opened her door to kindness once. It cost her a name, a future, and a roof. There are things in this world a girl can lose faster than dignity, but not many. The first night, she'd tried to sleep behind the saloon, but the laughter was too cruel there. The second night, she tried the church steps, only to be roused by the preacher's wife before dawn with a broom handle and tight lips. Go on, the woman had hissed. There's sinners enough inside. By the fourth day, hunger gnawed at her more than pride ever could. She stole half a biscuit left cooling on a crate and ran until her lungs gave out. Then she curled under the wagon and waited for something that didn't feel like punishment. The biscuit had been left there again the next day. And the day after that. She never saw who left it, not truly. A man's figure once, in the edge of her vision. Tall. Weathered. He never looked at her. Never lingered. Just set the food down and left like it were part of the dust. Silas Boone hadn't always lived at the edge of things. Once, he'd been the sort men followed into gunfire and women turned to in grief. But grief had swallowed him too, his wife buried beneath a weeping willow the town had since chopped down for firewood. Since then, he'd spoken less and watched more. And lately, his eyes had been on the girl beneath the wagon. That evening, the clouds bruised the sky. Thunder stitched the horizon in grumbling lines, and the light turned strange, like an oil lamp running low. Clara felt it first in her fingers, the storm. The cold soaked into her bones through the dirt. Her body curled tighter, the wind licking her bare toes. Still, she didn't move. The rain came all at once. Hard, furious. A slap from heaven. The wagon gave little shelter. The boards above her dripped steady, baptizing her without kindness. She pressed her head to her knees and whispered apologies to no one. To herself, maybe. Then, boots. Heavy. Slow. She didn't lift her head. Didn't dare to believe. The boots stopped just outside the wagon. She saw them now, mud-caked, scarred leather, toe tips pointing inward like he wasn't sure if he ought to be here. A pause. Then, a thick wool coat, coarse, warm, and dry, fell over her shoulders like a gentle verdict. She froze. The weight of it stunned her more than a slap ever could. Warmth came next, not just the physical kind, but the kind she thought she'd been barred from. The coat smelled of horses, pine soap, and something faintly like smoke. She looked up, just barely. He didn't speak right away. He was a shadow against the darkening sky, his hat low, face unreadable. You'll freeze, he said simply, voice like a fence post, rough, solid, planted deep. Then he turned and walked away. Clara's lips parted, but no sound came. Her fingers clutched the coat, trembling. She didn't run after him. She didn't thank him. She just sat there, as the rain softened its rage and the night curled up around her. Something inside her shifted. Just a little. Like a thaw. The next morning, she awoke not to fear, but to the smell of coffee hanging in the air like a promise. A tin cup clinked softly against a crate beside the wagon. A man sat nearby, elbows resting on his knees, eyes fixed on the horizon. He didn't look at her when he spoke. "Sun's up," he said. "You comin'?" She didn't answer. But her legs moved. One knee, then the other. The coat still hung from her shoulders. And as she stood, the dust of Drybell didn't rise in judgment, but in welcome, like it remembered her name. She followed him. The story had just begun. The ride out to Silas Boone's cabin was quiet, save for the slow creak of leather and the clink of reins. Clara sat side-saddle on his old mare, wrapped in the same coat he'd given her, its sleeves too long, its warmth too generous. Silas walked beside the horse, his boots stirring up dry whispers of prairie dust. He didn't glance at her, nor did he speak. But the silence wasn't heavy. It was merciful. Like a hush after grief. The cabin came into view just as the sun broke through the storm's remnants, its light catching on dew-damp grasses and making the wooden roof glisten like old silver. It was a humble thing, half forgotten by the world, but it stood proud against the open land. A porch sagged gently at one end, and a single lantern flickered in the window like someone had been waiting. Inside, the air smelled of ash and pine soap. Clara stepped cautiously past the threshold. Every movement felt too loud, her boots on the floorboards, her breath in her chest. Silas placed his hat on a hook, then crouched by the stove, coaxing flame from the coals with practiced ease. He said nothing. Just handed her a chipped tin cup with both hands, like a peace offering. The coffee was strong and bitter, but she drank. Not for the taste, but because her fingers curled tight around the heat, and for the first time in days, she didn't feel like vanishing. Silas moved like a man who'd made peace with quiet. He fixed a bit of stew, sliced a heel of bread, and placed it all before her without fuss. When she tried to speak, a whisper of thanks, her voice caught in her throat. He didn't seem to notice, or maybe he chose not to. That night, he laid a quilt on the small cot by the hearth, then unrolled his own bedroll by the door. "You sleep where it's warm," he said simply, and that was the end of it. Clara lay stiff under the quilt, the fire casting golden light against the walls. She watched it dance and crackle, unable to sleep, afraid that the kindness was a trick of the light. In the morning, Silas was already outside, splitting wood. She watched him through the window, how his muscles moved beneath his worn shirt, how each swing of the axe looked like an apology to something he couldn't fix. She stepped out, hands wrung tight. "Can I help?" He paused. Wiped his brow. Nodded once. No lecture, no protest. They worked together that day. She swept, cleaned dishes, stitched the curtain torn near the stove. He fetched water, mended fence posts, smoked a pipe in long stretches of thought. The work filled the silences and dulled the ache in her ribs. When their eyes met now, it didn't feel like a mistake. It felt like something being mended, thread by thread. But the town, like all small towns, had long memories and short tolerance. By the third morning, word had wormed its way back to Drybell. Eudora Finch stood at her shop's porch with arms folded and mouth pursed, hissing to whoever would listen. She's shacked up with Boone now. Living in sin, no shame. I warned y'all. That girl was born for scandal. The word slid through the town like oil on water. Clara went with Silas to fetch feed from the general store, eyes down, bonnet low. The air inside the shop was colder than the morning wind. The shopkeeper rang up the goods without a word. Silas kept his face carved from stone. Clara felt their judgment pressing on her skin, but she didn't flinch. Not until they stepped outside and the deputy crossed their path. He didn't speak to her. "Boone," he said, arms crossed, gaze firm. "Town's talking." Silas chewed his cheek, then said flatly, "Let him." The deputy nodded once, the kind of nod that meant trouble was on its way. Back at the cabin, Clara scrubbed the table harder than it needed, her shoulders tight. "I should go," she said, almost to herself. Silas didn't answer. He walked past her, tossed kindling into the stove, struck a match. The fire crackled to life. "You got a roof here," he said. "As long as you want it." Her hands paused mid-scrub. "I ain't afraid of their mouths," he added, softer now. "Just tired of watching people get broken by M." That night, she cried without noise. He didn't see it. Or maybe he did and gave her the grace of pretending not to. But the world has ways of testing fragile things. It happened just after midnight. Smoke. Then flame. The barn outside lit up like a torch, and the wind carried it wild. Clara was first to scream. Silas jolted from sleep, boots on before breath. Together they ran, he with a bucket, she with her bare hands. They worked without thought, without speech. The fire bit at their skin and spit cinders into their hair. The mare inside the barn kicked and shrieked. Silas ran in after her, disappearing into the blaze. Clara stood trembling in the dirt, clutching the next bucket, waiting. Then, he emerged, coughing, face smeared with soot, one hand leading the panicked horse, the other shielding his scorched arm. She dropped the bucket and ran to him. Later, by the porch steps, she pressed a wet cloth to his blistered palm. Her own hands shook. "You went back in," she whispered. Silas's breath was still ragged. "Course I did. You could have died." He looked at her, the fire's reflection dancing in his tired eyes. "So could you." Clara's lip trembled. Then, slowly, she pressed his bandaged hand to her cheek. A quiet act. Nothing romantic. Just reverence. "Why?" she asked. His answer came low, steady. "Because you deserve to be pulled out from under that wagon." She didn't look away. Not this time. The wind calmed. The night grew still. And in that moment, something deep inside her, the part that had curled up and quit, unfolded just a little. The fire had taken the barn, yes. But it hadn't taken them. And something told her, it never would. The morning air shimmered with that rare, golden stillness that follows after fire and forgiveness. Ash still clung to the edges of the yard, and the ruined skeleton of the barn stood like a testament to what had nearly been lost. Yet Clara stood taller than it now. She rose early, as she always did, but this time not to hide or hover. She wore a clean calico dress, one she had mended herself, its hem now even, it seems tight. Her hair, once matted with days of dirt and silence, was neatly braided down her back. The coat Silas had given her was folded on the porch rail, no longer a shield, but a keepsake. She walked the mile into Drybell with her chin just high enough to meet the sun, her boots dusting the road with quiet resolve. Each step echoed louder than any gossip. She didn't hide behind a bonnet or a man. She didn't need to. The town paused as she passed, Eudora Finch with her needle poised mid-stitch on the mercantile stoop, a ranch hand dropping his pail, even the preacher blinking twice like he'd seen a ghost made of flesh and pride. Clara felt every gaze pierce her skin, but none reached her heart. That had already been set ablaze, and from it, something stronger had risen. Inside the general store, the air hung thick. The same man who once refused to meet her eyes now stiffened behind the counter. She stepped to the register, placed a single coin down. Thread. The green, if you have it. His hands moved slower than usual. The thread was brought without a word. Clara reached out, took it gently, and held his gaze, not with defiance, but something quieter. Something older. I forgive you, she said. The words landed heavy. Not as an attack, but as release. And it was he, not she, who looked away first. Back outside, Clara didn't rush. She stood on the porch steps, looking over the town that had once swallowed her whole. Now, it choked on her calm. Eudora's voice cracked through the silence like a brittle bone. Think wearing a fresh dress makes up for what you are? Clara turned, but her smile was almost soft. I didn't come back to be liked, ma'am. Just to stop disappearing. The silence that followed wasn't cruel, it was reverent. When Clara returned to the cabin, she found Silas sitting on the stoop, a half-carved piece of wood in his lap, knife idle. He looked up at her, his eyes crinkling not in question, but quiet pride. How was town? They stared. Let M. She sat beside him, close enough to feel the warmth from his arm. Not touching, not needing to. Just existing near him now felt like shelter. She placed the thread on the step between them. I'm gonna sew curtains. Green ones. Silas nodded, whittling again. A moment passed, then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a peach. Held it out to her without a word. She took it. Bit gently. Juice slid down her wrist, and she laughed under her breath. He took a bite after her, and for a long while, they passed it back and forth. The peach was sweet and sun-warmed. The silence between them tasted the same. Later, Clara walked to the edge of the property where the barn had been. Only the foundation remained, blackened and broken. But in its place now stood small pots, tin cans and cracked dishes repurposed and filled with wildflowers. Yellow daisies. Purple aster. Her planting. Her hands. Something new where ruin once lived. Children sometimes came by, curious and shy. Clara would teach them to stitch, to mend buttons, to shape bread without bruising the dough. They brought their little sorrows to her, torn hems, scuffed knees, uncertain eyes. She healed what she could, with thread, with food, with the soft kind of love that asks nothing in return. She no longer flinched when strangers passed. She no longer walked with eyes low. Clara May Whitlow had become the kind of woman people didn't just see, they noticed. One afternoon, as she shelled beans beneath the porch awning, a girl of 10 approached timidly with a skirt in her hands and tears behind her eyes. Miss Clara, Mama says it's ruined. Clara took the skirt, turned it over gently. Then she smiled. Nothing's ruined, honey. Just waiting to be stitched right. That evening, as dusk folded over the prairie and the sun bowed low, Eudora Finch sat at her shop window, watching Clara laugh over supper with Silas under the porch light. She shook her head, not with bitterness, but with a strange sort of awe. Funny, she muttered to no one. Thought that girl was born for scandal. Turns out, she was built for storms. And the prairie listened. It always did. Now, if you're sitting somewhere, cold, silent, small, and wondering if there's a place left in the world that can still warm you, listen close. Sometimes, it only takes one voice that doesn't demand an explanation. One act of grace, quiet as a coat draped in the rain. One sunrise where you stand not to be seen, but because you've remembered your name. You were never too broken to rise. And never too lost to be found.